So it's been 3 days since the two shared a kiss, and everything seems to be going great, but Beck ends up asking Joe about his old girlfriend Candace, and he quickly brushes it off as two people that just didn't end up working out. As the two arrive at Beck's place, he makes a mental note that she's worth waiting for and he's not willing to have sex with her just yet, and he leaves Beck and shoots a tweet off from Benji's Twitter account to make it look like he's still active. And then he heads back to the bookstore where he's got Benji's body decaying pretty quickly. So he needs to figure out what he's going to do with his body, and he doesn't want to do a Google search because that leaves a digital footprint. So he heads to books to try to figure out what he needs to do to get rid of a body. And after a little bit of research, he realizes that the best course of action is to just chock the body full of chemicals and burn it. But he doesn't want dental records left, so now he has to take a mallet to Benji's dead face, and he just can't do it. In fact, he ends up puking over it. So to buy himself some time, he turns down the temperature in the room and puts a bunch of dehumidifiers in the cage and then leaves for the day. And as he's closing up, Paco shows up and he gives Paco a list of all the items he's going to need to get rid of Benji's body and a little bit of extra money for Paco to buy something that he wants. He figures it's probably best for Paco to go to a bunch of different stores. It's also not going to look as shady if a kid's buying this stuff as opposed to an adult. But meanwhile, Beck has been transferred to another teacher, and when she goes to meet with her, the teacher isn't in, but another teaching assistant is. And this teaching assistant is named Blythe, and she has kind of a legendary status about her. She also seems to be very judgmental, and it turns Beck into kind of an introvert because she doesn't want to say something that's going to be embarrassing. And when she goes out later that night and is explaining this to her friends, Peaches says it just sounds like the girl is pretentious, but Beck kind of sticks up for her. Beck also makes mention that she blew off some steam by banging a random guy last night, and her friends ask, well, what happened to the bookstore guy? She says, yeah, he's still in the picture, but I just needed a Tinder one-night stand. And Joe is hearing all of this, and he's pretty pissed off that she's still banging other dudes. But unfortunately for Joe, that's not the only guy she's going to be banging, because then she hooks up with the bartender at the bar. And because Joe's a glutton for punishment, he watches this all go down from the stoop across the street from her apartment. And this guy bangs her so hard that he actually breaks the bed. I mean, tip of the cap to you. So the next day she comes home and she's trying to write, but since her bed is broken, it's distracting her. And Joe is watching this all go down, so he shoots her a text and says, hey, are you free? I need to buy a new end table. To which she responds with, you read my mind, I actually need a new bed. So he heads off and grabs Mr. Mooney's Buick Skylark, which he thinks will impress Beck, and in fact, it does. The two head off to a furniture store where she spots a red ladle, and she says, I have one of these. And Joe has heard all about her red label from Benji, where Benji told him that she uses it as like a spanking tool. But the real story is that she has the red label because it was her dad's, and she associates the red label with good days, because when she would wake up and smell pancakes, he was making them with the red label. And every time he put that red ladle away, she would sit there and just wait until it came out again, until one day it just never came out. Joe almost gets caught once again, though, when she's looking at a king-size bed, and he makes mention that her place is too small for a king-size bed. She says, how do you know? But once again, Joe's really quick, and he says, well, every place in New York City is too small for a king-size bed. But shortly after, he decides to be bold and makes a move and starts going down on her in public, and she seems to be into it until she hears people coming. She quickly stops him and says, I'm not trying to get arrested because you decided to go bush diving. And the two buy furniture, but it got very awkward after that. And as she's loading up the furniture, he gets a call from Ethan from the store because all the AC units and dehumidifiers blew a fuse, and the electrician is at the bookstore, wanting to get into the basement. And of course, Joe can't let this happen. So he tells Ethan, no, go home, send the electrician home. I'll figure it out when I get back to the bookstore. So he drops Beck off and rushes over to the bookstore where Benji's body is quickly decomposing to the point where he can't keep it there. And as he's packing up the body, he gets a text from Beck, who's asking him for help putting together the bed. So he wraps up Benji's body in a carpet, puts it in the trunk, and heads over to Beck's place to help build her new bed. And after they build the bed, she apologizes for the way she acted in the bookstore and says, I just don't want you to think of me like that because I like you. I really like you. And the reality is, me and Blythe are supposed to submit 20 pages of poetry, and when she submitted hers, it kind of got in my headspace a little bit. And the two get into a conversation about her work where Joe says, you shouldn't be thinking about Blythe. Just write what you write. Write for yourself. The two start fooling around in the new bed, but they're quickly interrupted by Peaches, who comes in the apartment stating that she needs to go to the hospital. When she sees Joe, she explains to him that she has a rare chronic bladder disease. And even though some people think she's uppity, she can't have any fast food, and all the liquor she has to be top shelf. To which he makes mention that she was doing Jaeger shots the other night, but nobody seems to hear it, because Beck has volunteered Joe to drive them to the hospital. So Joe obliges, but they're sitting in traffic, and Peaches is getting very rude, and finally she just says, you know what, we'll walk. She storms out of of the car, to which Beck apologizes for her behavior and follows her to the hospital. After getting treated, she seems to be feeling better, and Beck says, "What do you think of Joe?" And Peaches says, I mean, I like him, I guess. And Beck says, "Yeah, I think I like him. I think I really like him. You know, I wasn't really sure if I was ready to get involved," but Peaches just cuts her off and says, "You can't be serious. I mean, this guy works at a bookstore. Look, I know you. You need someone to take care of you so you can just write all day and not have to worry about anything. And you can't do that with this guy. You don't need somebody like Joe and his financial limitations." Beck shoots back that that's not fair, and then Peaches brushes it off and asks her if she wants to go get food, but Beck isn't ready to brush it off and says, "You know what? No, I'm good. I'll see you later," and walks out. But when Joe got back to his house from dropping them off at, we'll say, the hospital, but not really, he's greeted by 2 police officers and Ron, his next door neighbor. And the police want to know why Joe is having a child go get all of these things that basically seem like he wants to get rid of a body. Now, at this point, we've learned that Joe is pretty quick on his feet, and he uses this skill once again when he says, "You know what, it's better if I just show you," and takes him to the side of the building and shows them a garden. He says, "I need lighter fluid because I barbecue. I need the chemicals for roots." And Ron is beside himself. He says, "I'm a corrections officer. I know there's something up with this guy." And Joe says, "Yeah, I realize I might have overstepped my bounds, but the reality is the kid looked hungry and I wanted to give him a little bit of money to get a sandwich. I'm not saying they're bad parents, but it just seems like the kid's hungry." And that really sets Ron off, and the cops have to hold him back. The cops also apologize for bothering Joe. The whole time, Joe is thinking how easy it is to fool these people because he's just so unassuming. So now that it seems like he's scot-free, he takes all the items to the park and drags the body into the woods. And as he's setting up the bonfire, he gets a phone call from Beck. And instead of just ignoring it, the idiot answers it. And it couldn't come as worse timing because as he's talking to her, 2 hikers are coming near him. And obviously, they cannot see the body. So as she's asking him to come over and finish what they started on the bed, he's getting more and more flustered, saying that she's sending him mixed signals and he doesn't really know what she wants. Eventually, he simply just hangs up on her, and at the last second gets that bonfire started. It startles the hikers, but they keep on walking. Afterwards, he's trying to get in touch with Beck, but to no avail. She keeps sending him straight to voicemail. And it might have something to do with Beck's workload, where she was supposed to admit 20 pages to her new teacher's workshop, but she only got 1 done. She kept working on it, and she thought it all sounded stupid, but this 1 page she's really proud of. The issue is she needed 19 more. And to make matters worse, Blythe is getting praised like the second coming, and Beck is simply getting judged left and right. So she couldn't have had a worse day, and she doesn't really know what to do, so she heads on over to the bookstore. And as she's practicing what she wants to say to Joe, she's caught by Joe. She apologizes and says, "You know what, you're right, I probably did send some mixed messages, and I do drop everything for my friends, and I do use them as an excuse not to write. And the reality is, I'll use anything as an excuse not to write, because I'm worried that I'm going to be the shittiest writer in this city." And all of this is just to say that I don't know who I am, so how am I supposed to say what I want? And then she realized that she doesn't even know a lot about Joe. She's never been to his apartment, she doesn't know his friends, so Joe says, "All right, if you want to know something about me, follow me." He brings her downstairs into the basement and shows her the rare book room. He tells her that this place is the most important place in the world to him, and if she wants to know who he is, it's right here. Because these books, as weird as it sounds, are more alive than most people he knows. So yeah, he'll show her his apartment, and she can meet his friends, but this place right here is more important to him than any of that. And that talk went so well that she ends up deleting Tinder. And Peaches makes an offhanded comment that, you know what, maybe it's best that you just have a simple life with him. But while she's judging Beck for possibly getting in a relationship with Joe, she notices that the book that Joe was looking at is missing. And it's obviously even more suspicious because Joe was looking at that book and Joe works in a bookstore. But Beck brushes it off as, "I'm sure it'll show up eventually." And he gave that book to Paco, and when Joe gets home, he sees Paco on the step, and Paco apologizes for leaving the list on his bed, to which Ron saw. As Joe is saying not to worry about it, Ron comes home and tells Paco to go into his room and starts telling Joe, once again, "I told you to stay away from Paco." Joe can smell the bourbon on his breath as Ron says, "I know there's something wrong with you, I just know it." And then he walks inside. Joe files it away as a potential problem later on, but he quickly forgets about Ron when Beck sends him a very scandalous photo. And he quickly heads over there and ends up giving her the best 13 seconds of her life. Thank you for watching this recap. If you do not see the next one up in the corner right there on the end screen, don't worry, it'll be up shortly. Please consider following the channel. That'd be cool. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. And if you don't, there's a thumbs down button for a reason.